Hello there.
Doctor Sleep is the sequel to 1980's The Shining and is written and directed by Mike Flanagan and stars Ewan McGregor as Danny Torrance, the little kid that was riding the tricycle through the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. In this one, he deals with a lot of alcoholism. He's trying to go straight, but there's this little girl who also has the same abilities that he does, while a cult led by Rose the Hat, played magnificently by Rebecca Ferguson, is on the loose, and I'm really not gonna spoil anything else other than to say they hunt shiners. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil anything else in case you have never seen The Shining, you have never read The Shining, you haven't seen this movie, and you haven't read the sequel, Dr. Sleep. Mike Flanagan has a very tough task here with Dr. Sleep because, for those of you that don't know, when the adaptation of The Shining came out in 1980, that movie starred Jack Nicholson. Stephen King was not a fan. It really deviated a lot from the source material. There was still a lot of stuff that was in there, but from what I read the plot and the differences between the book and the movie because I've never actually read the book, and I've never read the book for Dr. Sleep. That book was released in 2013. It was a sequel to The Shining, but Stephen King was not happy with that adaptation. He said Stanley Kubrick deviated too far from the source material, and he didn't really like all the little changes that Stanley Kubrick made in terms of the characters and kind of the supernatural occurrences that happen in the movie, whereas they happen differently in the book. From what I know in the book of The Shining is that the Overlook Hotel was never built on a Native American burial ground. I think that's only made up for the movie. And I know that Jack Torrance dies in a different way than he does in the movie. There's a lot of ambiguity with the movie, but Stephen King wrote the novel Dr. Sleep as a continuation of his story, not Stanley Kubrick's story that we see on screen. He wrote the novel as a continuation of the Shining story that he wrote, that he had his own vision for, that he wrote. And so now Mike Flanagan has to adapt that. What do I mean when I say that Mike Flanagan has a tough task here? Well, he's got to appeal to 4 different demographics. He's got to appeal to wide audiences. He's got to appeal to fans of Stephen King's novel. He's got to appeal to fans of Stanley Kubrick's film adaptation. And he's got to respect both Stanley Kubrick and Stephen King. He's got to balance all 4 of those at one time. And I think Flanagan does a really good job. He says the movie takes place more in the cinematic universe of Stanley Kubrick's movie, but he also takes elements from the novel, and while this is a direct adaptation of the novel, there has to be changes made so that it fits in with Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. And I was in for this ride for the entire movie. It is a bit long, I will say that. That's probably my one complaint I'll say about the movie. It is a bit long, and it feels long. But there's a lot going on in this movie where it's got a decent pace. There were never times in this movie where I felt it ran too slow, it went too fast. I think it was just right. Even though it does feel a little bit slow. The pacing's never there, but it's just, there's not a huge amount going on within the first 20 minutes because it's all backstory, but once you get past that mark, that's where the movie picks up significantly. But even then, those first 20 minutes are paced very well. Even though the movie does feel a bit long, and it feels a lot longer actually than its 151-minute runtime. Ewan McGregor,
hello there,
is awesome as Danny Torrance. This is probably the best I've ever seen Ewan McGregor.
hello there.
But the standout for me in this movie was Rebecca Ferguson as Rose the Hat. Rebecca Ferguson is, like I've already said, magnificent in this movie. But Rose the Hat is one of the most terrifying villains I have seen put on screen in a while. That shit scared the shit out of me and disturbed me to the core. And it's because she has so much screen presence, because she has an ultimate goal. The stakes are there. That's what makes Rose the Hat so great, and she's just so terrifying and villainy, and I love that about Rose the Hat. Mike Flanagan also uses a lot of classic transitions between scenes, a lot of cross dissolves in this movie. I forget if there were a lot of cross dissolves in The Shining, but if there were, that's probably paying homage to Stanley Kubrick's unique way of making a movie. I love how Mike Flanagan did that, because you don't really see scene transitions anymore. The only time you really see them are in the Star Wars movies.
Hello there.
You don't see cross dissolves anymore. You don't see any of that at all, and I think it was used magnificently in this movie, and it made the editing seem so seamless. I think this movie has the same advantage of Avengers Endgame, which I don't know why I'm comparing this to Avengers Endgame, but Endgame is 3 hours, but each act has something different going on in it. You have the first act, which is this thing, the second act, which is this thing, and then the third act, which is this thing. Dr. Sleep kind of does it the same way. You have the first act, where we're introduced to the characters and Danny and what he's going through. You have the second act, where he's introduced to this little girl named Abra, and they have to do something. And then you have the third act, which the third act is complete insanity. It's awesome. It's one of the coolest third acts ever. And I really love that about that movie. It's a perfect 3-act structure, just how I felt Endgame was a perfect 3-act structure. And let's talk about that third act for a minute, because that third act, yeah, people are really going to complain that it's just fan service. And it really is just fan service, but up to that point in the movie, the fan service feels earned. It never feels like you're cheated out of that fan service. That's one of the correct ways to do fan service. It's like in Endgame, when we got all that fan servicey stuff, but we felt like it was earned because the 3-hour runtime led to those fan servicey moments sprinkled throughout the movie, as well as the previous 21 movies before it. This, we have a movie before it. When we get to the third act, everything that third act is building to feels like it is earned. You never feel cheated out of it. I don't know how people would assume that this is bad fan service. Like, this is exactly the way I thought that the third act was going to go. Like, I love how the third act really just pays a lot of homage to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's great. It's fan service at its best. It feels earned. You don't feel cheated. It's the journey to get there that matters. As long as that payoff is there, that's what really matters. With everything he had to balance, Mike Flanagan had a tough task ahead of him, and I think he pulled this off beautifully. There are a couple of issues I have with the movie, specifically some of the slower scenes in that first 20 minutes or so, and then it's bloated runtime. But, I mean, The Shining was also 2 hours and 25 minutes, so I would expect this movie to be somewhere in that vicinity, which it is. But even then, like, I don't, those first 20 minutes, they're still paced very well. It's just, there's not much happening in those 20 minutes, but once you start seeing things happen, that's where this movie becomes thoroughly engrossing. I'm gonna give Dr. Sleep an A. Guys, what did you think of Dr. Sleep? Drop me some feedback in the comment section below as to what you thought of Dr. Sleep. I'll leave my link to my website in the description below. There you will find all my links to my social media accounts. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies somewhere.
Goodbye, old friend.